Hello and welcome back to episode 4 of Cryonaut.tv. In this episode we're going to go over FM synthesis, or frequency modulation synthesis, going over a little bit about how it works, a couple things that make it special and different from like subtractive synthesis, for example, and then I'm going to show you a couple different synthesizers and how they approach FM synthesis. First of all, I wanted to use FM8 to go over some FM synthesis, and this is one of my favorite synths to use. I love it because you can use it as a subtractive synth. You can use it as, you know, a whole bunch of different layers for your sound, or you can do FM stuff and get some really crazy sounds with it. So I've started using this a couple of years ago now. I don't know, definitely after its prime, but still, it's a great synth. It's very powerful. I love it. And it can be very confusing the first time you look at it. You know, you have a bunch of different settings over here. You have these operators in the expert mode. All this stuff just looks complex. And especially once you get a whole patch going over here, it just, you don't even know what's going on if it's your first time looking at it. But in reality, it's a little bit simpler than that. You have operators A through F, and then again A through F over here, and then X and Z. Now X is your noise oscillator, Z is your filter. And so what you can actually do is route any one of these, or all of them even, through the noise or the filter, or both, whatever you want to do. And then you can route each oscillator, each operator into each other or themselves, and just kind of modulate your own waveform in and of itself. So you over here you have A through F again. You can pick the ratio, and if you wanted to offset them by just a little bit, cause some detune basically, you could do that. You can here pick all kinds of different waveforms to start with, and then do a couple other things. Now, one of the key things about FM synthesis that separates it from the others is, like in subtractive synthesis, you have a waveform that plays and goes to the output, and that's pretty much it. And then it goes through, you know, the envelope and the filter, all those different things, but nothing affects that actual waveform while it's being generated. In FM, you have two different things called a carrier and modulator waveforms. Now, a carrier waveform is like this right here, F. It's going to the output, which is what this is right here. So a waveform that goes to the output directly is called a carrier. It carries the sound through the whole thing. The next type is a modulator, and here is a modulator waveform. So E is modulating F. You're not going to hear the waveform of E going to the output. It's only going to change how F sounds, and so that's how FM is really mainly different. You have a bunch of different waveforms that aren't necessarily being played to go to the output. They're being played to affect other waveforms somehow. So I have a nice little chart here that sort of helps explain how this works a little bit. Don't worry about these bottom two. It's too crazy to even understand really what's happening. But basically, let's say you start with a sine wave right here. It's playing, cycling through. So that would be our F waveform, right, or F operator right here is playing just a sine wave. Then once we introduce E playing another sine wave, this is how it affects the output of FM8, the whole synth. Instead of two different sine waves playing at the same time, you have basically another sine wave playing, a smaller one that's playing twice as often as this one right here. And so the waveform still has the general shape of that first sine wave, but with another little sine wave going twice as fast. And so that's basically how FM works in modulating these other waveforms. Now, in case that didn't really make too much sense to you, I have an oscilloscope here to help kind of show you really what's going on through the output of this synth. So when I play a note now, you get a sine wave. Ignore these little glitches here, that's just it repeating on the screen here. So you have a sine wave, and this is what it basically looks like. Now, when I introduce E, you'll hear the sound change, and you'll also see the waveform change quite dramatically. So now you can still see the overall sine wave happening here every 2 peaks, but in between that there's another little dip or a little peak caused by the modulator of E. And so as you bring up the amount here, you can actually see it affect it more and more and create more and more and more peaks and valleys, and just you can see how it actually affects the waveform a lot more. And that's one of the key things about FM synthesis. You're not usually going to want to crank these all up to 100, because that's just going to turn to noise very quickly and kind of destroy your sound, which occasionally can sound good, but most of the time you really want to keep these low, so that you actually have a harmonic content to your sound. It's not just pure noise. So when you do that, see that 34, it's a lot less of an effect it has on the sound, or on the waveform even. And so you can actually add more things, and multiple different modulators. You can have things affect itself, and that way, by doing all those different things, you have a very unique sound that actually still sounds good. So I mentioned that each operator can actually modulate itself, and what that looks like is you just, in FM8 at least, you do this and you can see it's going back into F. You can see the little arrow right there. And you need to be really careful with this. This is where you can just destroy your sound into noise. And so I'll show you that real quick. So you can see once you get up to like 80, 90, it's almost pure noise, and then you can't hear very much harmonic content at all. So when you're doing this, if you just do a little bit, a sine wave doesn't give you the best example. Let's try maybe a saw wave. So you can't really see much of a difference in the oscilloscope, but you can definitely hear it. Even when it gets up to 10 to even 20, maybe in there, you start to hear a little bit extra buzziness to the sound, and that's just the sound modulating itself. And then once you get up higher, it starts to just ruin the sound, in my opinion. So this can be very useful in some cases, but just be very careful and only use a little bit when you do that. Put this back to sine. Now, the next thing to look at is the ratio here. This can have a huge impact on the sound. So again, we'll bring this up to like 35 or 40. Sure. You can see here it's got a very interesting waveform. So this is a good way to get your own waveforms, and then if you can export these and import them into Serum, you can have your own wavetable there and just really create cool stuff. So here is our sound with a ratio of 1. Now with FM8, this is a little bit different. It's not just an octave every 1 for the ratio, it's more exponential. So from 1 to 2 is going to be an octave, but then it's 2 to 4 is another octave, and then 4 to 8, 8 to 16, and you're up to 64. And in the same way, it goes back down the other way. So 1 to 0.5 is an octave, 0.5 to 0.25 is an octave, and then 0.25 to 0.125 or whatever it is. So it's a little bit of math. So you kind of want to, I usually just stick to about 2 octaves because it's simple that way. And so how this can work is if you have, let's say 2, the sound goes to this. Because the E operator is playing at twice the speed that it was before, another whole octave higher. So it adds a lot more harmonics to the sound, and it just, you can see it changes the waveform pretty dramatically. So now if we go up to 4. Again, it's starting to look crazy here. You can't even see what's going on. And it adds a lot more higher harmonics to the sound. So if we go back to 1, you have that sound again. Let's go down a little bit. And here you can see it's still affecting the sound, but it's playing a lot slower. And we'll go one more. So if we turn this off, that's how it affects the sound. And so I'll bring this back up to 1. I'll gradually bring it up so you can kind of hear how the sound changes now. It's pretty hard to get to 1 exactly. But you can hear there's a lot of more metallic sounds that happen at those various ratios. And FM synthesis is very well known for its metallic sounds. Because you can get just really weird and dissonant kind of sounds because of the ratio. So definitely something to play with. You don't always want to stick to even ratios, even octaves, or half octaves, whatever it is. Maybe you want to go a little bit down sometimes, a little bit off, because that'll give you a more full sound with those extra harmonics in there. Now, at the beginning of this, I mentioned the X and Z operators as the noise and filter. So how that works is, if we get rid of this, we can route F through X. And if you click on one of them here, you can get to the actual specific one for that operator. To get back, just go to operators over here. And then we need the output. So when we add the noise, this is what happens there. And so you can mess with all the different settings here. The noise amp, if you turn this down, you're not going to get any noise. And if you bring it all the way up, you get a lot. So, you can mess with this resonance and the saturation, things like that. It's just another option. Then we have the filter. Pretty standard filter. The nice thing about it is because you have all these different operators, you can put how much you want of them to go into here. So what you can actually do is say you want this one to go straight to the output for 32, but then you want some of it to go through the filter as well. So let's change C to a saw wave. So it's kind of like your own little mixer in here. How much of it do you want to go straight to the output? How much do you want to go through the noise or the filter? You can do a lot of stuff here, and it's very easy to get overwhelmed. So if you're starting out with FM8, I really recommend sticking with just 2 or 3 operators. Go simple at first until you kind of get your head around what's happening here, and then you can start adding in more things. When I started, I used a bunch of different operators. I would have them going all over the place. Let's modulate that one. You can modulate either direction. Just look at where the arrow is going. I'd have some self oscillation going on. I just had all kinds of stuff, and I ended up with a bunch of noise. So really start out slow and build each layer very slowly to see what is actually going to happen to your sound. Now, I also mentioned that you can use this as a more subtractive kind of synth, even though it is an FM synthesizer. So how you would do that is by not using any modulation over here, just having each oscillator go straight to the output. So let's change a couple of these now. Alright, we're going to use C through F here. And by doing this, you can have 4 different waveforms, 4 different sounds playing, going to the output. You can mix them how you want down here. You can have them go through the filter. You can change the ratios. You can do whatever you want. And then every time you play a note, it's going to play all 4 oscillators at the same time. And this can give you a lot more creative results than a regular subtractive synth, because you have 4 different waveforms happening. Usually you can pick, maybe 2. Sometimes you can pick 4. But in this case, it just gives you a little bit of a different kind of control than something else, like Silent 1, for example. So let's play these notes, and I'm going to slowly bring in each oscillator. And then I'll play with the ratio a little bit. And you know about the filters, so we don't need to worry about that. So here's how you can make, a different layered kind of sound. So you can make some really cool stuff here, and if you spend more time really crafting the ratios and crafting the actual levels of each thing, you can get some awesome stuff just by having them go straight to the output, not even doing any modulation. And then of course, if you started doing that, that's how you get more gritty and aggressive sounds, is when you start adding in the modulation. So definitely play with this a lot and experiment with these different kind of things. The formants are really cool too. Let's try the 5th formant. I should probably reset these. And one thing I like to do, because the modulation stuff can really impact the sounds in a strange way, is I'll activate A and bring it out, and we'll drop it down to add more of a sub oscillator. So instead of having a whole separate thing, I just use one of these operators to be the sub. So tons of options, really cool stuff you can do here. And so another thing that we haven't even touched on here is the different envelopes. So if you come over here, you have the envelopes for each oscillator. Again, you can do modulation, you can do all kinds of stuff, but the envelope section is really cool because you have a separate envelope for every single operator, including the noise and the filter. And so let's D, we'll change this to a saw wave. And if we impact this by a lot, here's our sound now. Of course, we should probably reset this back to 1 as well. That's a really aggressive, buzzy kind of sound. I don't really like that all the time, but what you can do, so you did see we can go into the individual one, you have the envelope here, but what's nice about this one is we can link different envelopes. So if you wanted to create an envelope for your main sound, you can have one that applies to all of these, or if you wanted it as a starting point, So, you know, I can link A, B, and C, and then as I do that, you can actually watch down here as the whole envelope changes. But what I was trying to do with operator D is, because this sound is a little bit too much for me, what we can do is drop this down and give it more of a pluck kind of envelope. Which gives it a much more aggressive and like a bite to the attack part of the sound, but it quickly goes back to the more calming, you know, regular sound, and it doesn't, you know, destroy the whole thing all the time. It just gives it more of an attack. So that's one option as well, and it just gives you a lot more control over your actual sound. So even if you have let's see, let's put C all the way up, modulate it all the way up. We just have a bunch of noise. If we do this, it does give it more of a plucky, you know, attack kind of a sound. So without that envelope, it would just be pure noise the whole time. Because of the envelope, it just gives it a more aggressive sound at the very start of the note. So definitely a really cool feature, and that's something I love about FM8. So now I wanted to go over a couple other synths, mainly Ableton Live's operator. It's also an FM synthesizer. It's a little bit different. It only has A through D here, and you don't have that little matrix to pick, you know, how things operate. So instead, if you come and click down here in this little bar, you can pick how the operators go through each other. So you can see the different colors match up over here. So in this case, you're going to have D modulating C, modulating B, modulating A, which is then going to the output. If you pick this one, then you have the more subtractive kind of thing, where all of them are only going straight to the output and not modulating each other at all. Or you can pick any combination of those, you know, and so you have all these different things. So right now, D, C, and B are all modulating A at the same time, instead of this one modulating this one, which is then modulating this one, you know. You can have this one where you have just two different channels. So two modulators are modulating the carriers, which are then going to the outputs. Lots of different options. And then once you click on each operator here, you can choose the waveform, or you can draw one in yourself, and you know, get whatever kind of sound you want. And in this case, the level is how you would do that instead of drawing in the matrix. You know, how much. So right now they're all set down to infinite negative, so you have nothing going through. If we set this one back to if we set this one back to a sine, we can bring in this one. And so that way you can hear how it's modulating it. Let's go back to this one. And then as we bring in the other operators, they're going to be modulating the one below it. And then over here is the tuning side of things. Instead of the ratios, you just have the tuning, which is maybe a little bit easier in this case because you go by steps and then you can fine tune it and whatever. And this stuff just creates crazy sounds when you just pick random stuff in FM. So, you know, definitely mess with that as well. And if you're familiar with Ableton Live's operators and the analog synth, you have the LFO over here, you have a filter. So lots of different things you can play with. So this is just a different way of using FM. I don't want to call it simpler. It has less operators, so it's simpler in that sense of things, but the rest of it is different too, so maybe it's more complex. it's kind of up to you and which one you get more comfortable with. So the last thing I wanted to go over is Serum, because everybody uses Serum, everybody loves it. So this is a wavetable synthesizer that has a hint of FM. So if you don't want to go full FM synthesis and all these different modulation graphs and tables and whatever, you can start with a little bit by coming in here and activate both oscillators, and then down here is where you have all these different modulation things. You can pick FM from oscillator B, or if you want to do the other way, FM from A. And this will use oscillator A as the carrier and oscillator B as the modulator. So whatever waveform you have here is going to modulate oscillator A. So if we go to the basic shapes and it's turned off, so oscillator A by itself sounds like that. When you add in B, that's just a little bit louder because there's now two of them playing. But once we start bringing in some FM, you'll hear the sound change again because it's getting modulated. So this doesn't give you as much control as a regular FM synthesizer, but if you just want, a little bit of it, maybe you don't want to get into the full thing, but you want to be able to use some FM, then this is a great way because you just have the amount. You don't really get to pick all the other ratios and all that. You can still choose the tuning up here, the octaves and everything, which will still give you that distinct FM kind of sound, but it's a lot simpler this way. So maybe start out using Serum and do some FM that way, and then if you can find some good, decent sounds, then you go back into Operator or FM8 or whatever DAW you're using. Probably has an FM synth of some sort. Maybe it doesn't come free, but I don't know. It depends on what you use and how much, which level you bought of it. There's other ones out there. This one is by Native Instruments, so if you bought the complete Native Instruments complete thing, then this will come with it. So in a nutshell, that's FM synthesis. Obviously there's a ton of stuff you can do with it, and if I were to go over Subtractive, I could tell you this is kind of how you make an aggressive sound, this is how you make a soothing kind of sound. FM, you can't really do that. It's a lot more complex. So just by the sheer volume of various waveforms you can pick, and then how you actually put them together, by making a change of 5 in here will make a noticeable difference. And kind of like if you have a whole bunch of different effects, when you change the signal flow of things, you change the order of one thing, or you just change the volume or the mixing of one item early in the chain, it can hugely change everything down the chain. So here, if we have all these different things modulating each other, by changing just one thing, just slightly, it can change the whole sound in huge ways, drastically. So it's a lot more of experimentation here and just kind of getting to know what kinds of things affect the sound in various ways. So by using a sine wave on a sine wave, you figure out that's how the sound will turn into this kind of sound. And so if you then switch that out and say, okay, well, what does a square wave do to a sine wave? That's probably the best way to learn how things will actually, work in FM. So I need to subtract this one. All right. So, pick a square wave and do that, and then pick a saw wave. Maybe a triangle. And then go through and do the opposite, where you start with a square wave, maybe. And just kind of get a feel for what kind of sounds you like as a bass, and then from there, maybe add in a couple more oscillators or operators, and just add a little bit at a time and see, you got to be light-handed with this stuff. If you try and just max it all out, you're going to get noise, like I've said. So if you add in another one, let's see, so D is a sawtooth, and then just do a little bit here and a little bit there. And you can even see that just adding 4 and 13 there makes a noticeable difference. It's not a huge world-changing difference, but you can hear it. So then each one that you add in just a little bit will modify the sound just in slight ways, and so maybe you want to craft it just to get that perfect sound that you want. So definitely give FM stuff a shot, see what you can come up with, and let me know, what kind of sounds you've come up with here. Give me some examples. Let me know any issues you have with this or any struggles you have learning FM. I love using FM synthesis, so if you have any questions, let me know and I'll see what I can do to cover them for you too.